I certainly understand where the narrative come from, because what it's trying to do is to present a case that we treat different communities in a different way and somehow we give special treatment. That is not the case. Operational policing decisions are based on the ground experience of the officers at that moment in time, and it's always a balance between allowing peaceful protest, which of course in a democracy we support, with an absolutely clear line that if people breach that and cause damage, they should be taken to task.
So the Prime Minister has insisted communities will be safe. There was an emergency meeting of the Cobra Committee last night, but will they? Because we're expecting up to 40 more so-called gatherings across Britain today. Let's speak to Jim McMahon, who's a local government minister. He joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
How prepared are you for 40 more of these gatherings, protests, riots, whatever you want to call them?
Well, of course, we hope that they don't take place in terms of the violent scenes that we have seen and people heed the warnings. But equally, we need to prepare for the eventuality that they do. And so we have ramped up activity on the number of police, on the court capacity, on the prosecutor capacity. So there's a really clear message that if people engage in violent disorder, they will face the full force of the law.
6,000 riot police officers, I think I'm right in saying, if you divide them between 40 locations, and there's no reason to think that people who are hell-bent on this stuff are going to listen to you, that works out 150 riot police officers at each location. Is that enough?
Well, operational policing, of course, is a matter for each individual police force. We're confident from the reports that we've had that the police have the capacity that they need and that they've done an assessment of the planned protests. But of course, we need to see what happens a bit later on. Hopefully they don't pass. People should heed the warnings that have been laid out. People also should see that in terms of violent disorder that has taken place, there has been swift action in both arrest and then later charges that have been laid. So people should see that and recognise that the actions of a tiny minority in disrupting communities will not be tolerated.
Now, Stephen Parkinson, the Director of Public Prosecution, says that he's willing to consider charging some rioters with terrorism offences. Do you agree with that? And does the government now see what's happened as a terrorist attack as opposed to thuggery?
Well, the prosecution decisions are for the prosecutor. It's not for a politician on the morning media round to make that call. It's got to be based on the evidence. It's got to be based on the criminal threshold. And of course, that will happen in the most appropriate way. But listen, we don't want anybody to find themselves facing the justice system in the way that the offenders in previous violent offences have. We want people to respect the calm that we're asking for, to respect the communities who are being impacted. And also to reflect, all of us have the right to live in a community without fear that somebody will turn up and cause damage.
There have been some people contacting us, especially after yesterday, saying that there is a two-tier policing system going on, that people who are rioting, who are white, are treated much more harshly than Asian people who are rioting. And they point to the trouble in Birmingham, which sounded pretty bad and pretty intimidating, but I don't think any arrests were made. And there was very little, if any, police presence. You'll know yourself that Elon Musk, who owns X or Twitter, has waded in and also talked about two-tier policing and two-tier care. Do you understand where that concern comes from when you look at what happened in Birmingham?
I certainly understand where the narrative come from, because what it's trying to do is to present a case that we treat different communities in a different way and somehow we give special treatment. That is not the case. Operational policing decisions are based on the ground experience of the officers at that moment in time, and it's always a balance between allowing peaceful protest, which of course in a democracy we support, with an absolutely clear line that if people breach that and cause damage, they should be taken to task.
But they were causing damage in Birmingham. I mean, I'm sure you're across the detail, but they were damaging cars, they were damaging a pub, they were surrounding journalists. There was a lot of criminal behaviour going on, and they were not being taken to task. And actually, that's very damaging.
Well, I understand in that particular incident that the police made a tactical decision to withdraw and regroup, but the expectation is that if anybody's involved in criminal actions, that will be followed up. And I would also say, if we look at previous events that have happened, arrests can happen days and weeks, even months after the fact, as intelligence is gathered and people are identified. So let's not kind of preempt the ultimate outcome of this. But the message needs to be clear. It doesn't matter what your background. If you take part in criminal damage, if you take part in violence, if you seek to disrupt communities and affect people's way of life in an
Mm,
unlawful way,
mm.
then you can expect to be dealt with by the police.
Why do you think? Do you know why they withdrew it? Why they decided to withdraw?
I don't know. I mean, that's a matter for the police in terms of their operational decision. It's not for politicians on the TV
No, but
to
you just
answer that.
offered that new
But
piece of
it's a matter of
information
fact.
that no one knew. You said that you think that your information is that they decided to withdraw and regroup, which we didn't know. So I was wondering whether you knew anything else.
Well, I mean, it has been on because it was reported on the news yesterday or the day before, which is where I've got the information from. But the point is, in terms of operational decisions, that is for the police on the ground to make those calls and to make those judgments. But I also want to be clear that people should not believe that because an arrest wasn't taking place on the day, that somehow means that justice will not catch up with people. There's been many occasions across the days, weeks, and months where
Mm.
people have been caught up after the fact. People should be under no illusions if they go out and they cause damage and they cause disruption to communities and they act in a way that's unlawful, they can absolutely expect the full force of the law.
Okay. I'm sure you're aware of the YouGov poll that suggests that 49% of people polled think that Keir Starmer is handling the riots badly.
I've seen that. What people want is for calm and peace in every community. People want to be able to go around their everyday lives without fear that the communities where they live, where they're raising their family, where they're going to work, will be disrupted by a minority. And we need to be clear that this is a minority. It's not the majority. Most of us want to live in peace and to get along together. But there are people who are exploiting fears, who want to cause division, and in the end want to carry out their acts with violence. And that cannot be allowed to go unchecked.
Now, I understand that this all started because of the tragic events in Southport, and there are many people saying, "Well, I don't know how you get from that to this." However, we can't talk over people's. You just talked about it there. You acknowledged it that people do have some concerns over immigration, illegal and legal. Some of the people who've been rioting have been chanting, "We want our country back and stop the boats." Now, some people have got in touch with us this morning, Jim McMahon, and said that some of the problem is that you might not have liked the Rwanda plan, but there was a plan in place, and they feel that there's a vacuum right now. Michael in Sunbury, the last government had plans to stop the boats, leave the 1950s ECHR and the Rwanda plan. Starmer dumped those. Starmer wants to import more Labour voters. There's another one here from Stephen. The question isn't whether the Tories would approach the protest differently, but whether they would have occurred. Labour have scrapped the Rwanda scheme and likely to offer asylum to 90,000 illegal immigrants, contributing to many people wanting to protest. Do you understand that you may have a plan, but it looks like nothing's been done right now, and that into that gap fall a lot of these protesters?
I think all of us are concerned about community cohesion and about how we work through what is a very difficult period. But to be absolutely clear, people who are engaging in violent protests, who are damaging property, who are intimidating people, who are making people fearful about going out in their own communities, do not speak for the majority. The majority of us want to get on together in peace and to live a good life. The other thing I'll say is, the idea that what we have seen has happened in a vacuum over 4 weeks is ridiculous. The country is threadbare. People are worried about their own security, and the government have massively escalated the issue on border security without a plan previously to deal with. We've had 14 years of a Conservative government.
Well, they would say
And
they
the
did. They
inheritance
did. They
of
will say
that
they did have a
is
plan. It
very
was
much being
Rwanda.
felt by all communities. And the idea that the Rwanda scheme, that by the way didn't kind of set off in terms of the removals in the way that was promised, is absolutely for the birds. That wasn't stopping the small boat arrivals. It certainly wasn't dealing with the criminal gangs. Whereas Labour, and we're only 4 weeks in, has set
Mm.
up the border security unit. We're out there now looking for a lead for that because we are absolutely determined not just to chase the headlines, but to chase the criminal gangs who are exploiting people and, frankly, who are taking liabilities. We're not going to allow that to stand.
But
To be clear,
and
though,
yet migrants
whatever the
on
concerns,
boats are still arriving every day.
well, that's because we're establishing the border security unit that will deal with that, and it takes time to do that in the right way. You
Mm.
cannot solve this problem with a headline or a slogan. You've got to do it with hard work over a period of time to really crush the criminal gangs that are exploiting people. But whatever the concern, it's really important that we make this point,
Mm.
and the vast majority of people understand this point. Whatever the issue, it is not a legitimate response to protest in a violent way that causes damage to property and intimidates individuals. That's not okay.
Okay, Jim McMahon, thank you for talking to us. He is the local government minister.